Imagine slicing open a human body for the very first time. You're peering into this tangled architecture of white, stringy cords.
Right, just a complete mess of fiber.
Exactly. And you are trying to guess which ones move your muscles and which ones are like holding your bones together.
Which is not easy without a microscope.
No, not at all. For centuries, the smartest doctors in the world looked at that tangle and just couldn't tell the difference. They had no idea what a nerve actually was.
They were totally flying blind.
Yeah. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking a journey through the bizarre, bloody, and honestly dramatic history of a single medical root word, which is neuro.
And our mission today is really to uncover how this one specific concept evolved from, well, total ancient confusion right to the center of modern medicine.
Because it really is a wild history. Okay, let's unpack this because the ultimate irony here is right up front. If you open any modern medical textbook today and you look up the root neuro, you get a really clean one-word definition.
It just says nerve. Nerve, right. But the ancient Greeks who literally invented the word used it to describe something completely different.
Yeah, if we look at Homeric and early classical Greek texts, the word they used was neuron. But to them, a neuron was a sinew or a tendon or even a bowstring.
A bowstring.
Literally. Homer uses the word to describe the string of a warrior's bow. It was just this generic catch-all term for any tough cord-like fiber in the body.
So they just lumped it all together. I want you to picture, looking under the hood of a car, seeing a thick rubber fan belt and a bundle of electrical wires, and assuming they do the exact same thing just because they're both long and black.
That's a great way to think about it.
Actually, it's worse than that, right? The ancient doctors essentially thought those electrical wires were structural fan belts, like meant to physically pull the bones like puppet strings.
Right. They completely missed the concept of invisible signals because the visual similarity was enough to fool them. A tendon anchoring a muscle to a bone looked virtually identical to a peripheral nerve carrying a signal from the spine because they're both just white cords to the naked eye.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Without microscopic analysis or, any understanding of electricity, ancient anatomists just had no functional category for a nerve. Fibrous, stringy structures were all just neurons.
So who finally looks under the hood and realizes, hey, the fan belt and the electrical wire are part of two entirely different systems.
That monumental shift begins with Herophilus of Chalcedon.
Okay.
This is around 300 BCE. He was operating out of Alexandria in Egypt, which had really become the absolute epicenter of medical research.
Right, because they allowed dissections there.
Exactly. They permitted human dissection there. Some historical sources even debate whether they allowed vivisection of condemned criminals.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, it remains highly contested. But what matters is that Herophilus was systematically dissecting the human body directly, rather than relying on animal models like a lot of others did.
And his genius wasn't just in, making cuts. It was in how he conceptualized the whole architecture of the body. Like, he mapped it out.
What's fascinating here is why his methodology mattered so much. He didn't just look at a piece of tissue in isolation. He physically traced its network.
Okay, so following the cord.
Right. He realized that if you follow a stringy cord and it ends at a muscle or a bone, you are looking at a tendon. But if you trace that cord all the way back up into the brain or the spinal cord,
then you've got something totally different.
Exactly. You are dealing with a completely different physiological system.
And by physically tracing those paths, he also discovers that these cords have different jobs, right? Like some carry sensation from the skin and others send commands to the muscles.
Yes, the sensory versus motor nerves. And by proving that these pathways originated in the central nervous system, Herophilus proved that the brain was the actual seat of intellect.
Which was huge back then.
Oh, it was a direct explosive rebuttal to Aristotle.
Right, because Aristotle, despite his brilliance, had famously argued that the heart was the center of thought.
Yeah, he believed the brain was basically just a wet, cold radiator designed to cool down the blood.
A radiator? It is just wild to think that Aristotle could be so spectacularly wrong about the most complex organ in the universe.
Right, but it makes sense based on their limited tools.
Yeah.
So Herophilus maps the network, and then Galen comes along a few centuries later.
Right, Galen of Pergamon.
Yeah, he was practicing in the 2nd century CE as a physician to Roman emperors. He inherited this Alexandrian research and pushed it further by describing and numbering the cranial nerves.
He identified 7 pairs, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which is impressive, but modern anatomy tells us we have 12 pairs of cranial nerves.
Right, so he missed a few.
Galen's tools were simply too crude, Some cranial nerves are incredibly fine or, hidden deeply within the skull architecture.
Because you'd never see them without better gear.
Right. But despite missing a few, Galen's anatomical framework was so comprehensive that it became the absolute gospel of Western medicine for over 1,000 years.
Wow, 1,000 years.
Yeah. His texts, errors and all, dictated anatomical understanding right up until the Renaissance.
That's incredible. But, okay, so the ancients give us the distinct anatomical system. But knowing a nerve exists doesn't help you treat it when it fails, right?
Not at all.
The language had to evolve to describe the actual pathology, which I guess brings us to the 19th century.
Right. The 19th century marks the massive codification of medical language and really the true birth of neurology as a distinct specialty.
With people like Jean-Martin Charcot, right?
Exactly. Working at the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris. He was categorizing neurological diseases with unprecedented precision.
And this is where the core mechanic of medical terminology that we use today kind of locks into place.
Yeah, it's a building block system.
Right. You take the ancient Greek root, neuro, and you bolt it onto a suffix to build a highly specific clinical condition. Let's look at how this language actually works in practice, because these words describe conditions affecting millions of people right now.
Absolutely.
Let's take the suffix alalgia, meaning pain. We get neuralgia.
Nerve pain. And this isn't just a generic everyday ache. The sources highlight trigeminal neuralgia, which historically earned this intense nickname, tic douloureux.
That sounds awful.
It is. It affects the fifth cranial nerve, the trigeminal nerve, which supplies sensation to the face.
I've read descriptions from patients who say it feels like a lightning bolt just hitting their jaw. And the terrifying part is the trigger.
Right. It's not what you expect.
No, it's not caused by trauma. It can be triggered by something as harmless as the light breeze hitting your cheek or just like the friction of brushing your teeth.
And the underlying mechanism there is often a blood vessel pressing against the root of the nerve inside the skull.
Okay.
So the nerve loses its protective insulation. Because of that, normal, gentle physical sensations short circuit, and they're interpreted by the brain as agonizing, electric shock-like pain.
Wow. Okay, then you swap the suffix to mi-itis, meaning inflammation, neuritis. And optic neuritis is a major one here.
Yes, inflammation of the optic nerve, which transmits visual information from the eye to the brain.
And clinically, this is a massive red flag, isn't it?
It is. It frequently presents as blurred vision or pain with eye movement, and it is very often one of the very first clinical signs of multiple sclerosis.
Because multiple sclerosis is literally a disease where the body's immune system decides to attack the myelin, right? The protective insulation wrapped around those nerves.
Right. It targets that insulation.
So when the insulation strips away on the optic nerve, the visual signal degrades.
And that degraded signal is exactly what the patient experiences as sudden vision loss.
It's just so systemic. What happens when the underlying environment of the entire body turns toxic to the nerve itself? We get neuropathy. The suffix apathy meaning disease or damage.
Diabetic peripheral neuropathy is really the most devastating global example of this. We have over 500 million people worldwide living with diabetes.
That is a staggering number.
It really is. And studies suggest roughly half of them will develop some degree of this peripheral nerve damage.
And it usually starts as a tingling or complete numbness in the feet. But how does high blood sugar actually kill a nerve? Like, what's the mechanic?
Chronically elevated blood sugar acts almost like a toxin to the microscopic blood vessels, the capillaries that feed oxygen and nutrients to the nerves in your extremities.
Oh, so it's a supply chain issue.
Exactly. The blood vessels become damaged and narrow. So without blood flow, the nerve fibers essentially suffocate and die.
Which completely changes how we think about diabetes care. I mean, without feeling in the feet, a patient might step on a tack or get a blister from a tight shoe and just never feel it.
They'd have no idea.
Right. And that minor injury goes unnoticed, gets infected, and because the blood flow is already compromised, it won't heal.
This is precisely why podiatry and rigorous foot care screening are mandatory, non-negotiable parts of global diabetes management. The word neuropathy isn't just a descriptor. It dictates an entire preventative medical protocol to avoid amputations.
Okay, so we've covered pain, inflammation, and chronic disease. But the nervous system can also suffer, like sudden, catastrophic, systemic failure.
Yes, polyneuropathy.
Poly meaning many.
Exactly. A condition affecting many nerves simultaneously. Guillain-Barré syndrome is the classic honestly terrifying illustration of this.
Yeah, this one is scary. A completely healthy person gets a routine stomach bug or a mild respiratory infection, and 2 weeks later, they are paralyzed and on a mechanical ventilator.
It happens incredibly fast.
How is that biological leap even possible?
It is driven by a mechanism called molecular mimicry.
Mimicry.
Yeah. When you get a minor infection, your immune system builds custom antibodies to hunt down that specific virus or bacteria. But in Guillain-Barré, the proteins on the surface of the invading virus happen to look almost perfectly identical to the proteins on the surface of your own peripheral nerves.
Oh, wow. So the immune system wins the battle against the cold, but then looks around, sees the nerves, and says, oh, hey, there's more of them, and unleashes friendly fire on the body's own wiring.
That's exactly it. The resulting ascending paralysis is rapid and severe.
Do people recover from that?
Fortunately, with critical care, most patients do recover as the immune system eventually resets, but the speed of the systemic breakdown is breathtaking.
I can imagine. And then you have physical growths. Adding the oma suffix for a tumor or mass gives us neuroma.
Right.
Primary care doctors see Morton's neuroma all the time. It's a benign, painful thickening of the tissue around the nerve in the forefoot, often caused by, the mechanical compression of wearing tight, narrow shoes or high heels for years.
Very common.
But before we leave the anatomy, I want to clarify a massive misconception. Here's where it gets really interesting. I think most people use the words nerve and neuron interchangeably.
Oh, constantly. But it is a critical distinction, and mixing them up completely blurs how we understand the body.
Right, so think of a nerve like a massive transatlantic fiber optic cable resting on the ocean floor. You can hold it in your hand.
Right, it's macroscopic.
Yeah, a neurosurgeon can physically pick it up, dissect it, or cut it with a scalpel. That is the nerve, a visible macro-level bundle wrapped in tough connective tissue. But the neuron...
That is just one microscopic glass thread inside that massive cable.
Just one.
Right, a neuron is a single individual nerve cell. No surgeon can isolate a single neuron with a scalpel. You need a microscope for that.
Right.
And the genius of the root neuro is that it does double duty. It anchors the terminology for the macro-scale neurosurgery, dealing with the visible cable, and the microscale neuroscience, studying the cellular wire.
And we should probably clarify the boundaries of the map here. If a doctor is talking exclusively about the brain, they won't use neuro.
No, they'll use cerebro or encephalo. Neuro refers to the entire nervous system, the whole network, from the brain down to the tips of your toes.
Got it.
Furthermore, myelo is used specifically for the spinal cord, though confusingly, it is also used for bone marrow.
Well, medical terminology isn't perfect.
No, definitely not. And plexo describes a braided, tangled network of nerves, like the brachial plexus in your shoulder.
So we have the visible cable and the microscopic wire. You'd assume that discovering that microscopic wire, the neuron, would be this, unifying moment of triumph in medical history.
You think so?
But it actually sparked one of the most bitter, dramatic, and petty rivalries in the history of science.
It really did. The late 19th century was completely consumed by this great debate: the neuron doctrine versus reticular theory.
Okay, let's set the stage in 1873. We have an Italian physician named Camillo Golgi.
Right.
And he invents a revolutionary silver staining technique that he nicknames La reazione nera, the black reaction.
Yes, and for the first time in human history, scientists can look through a microscope and see individual nerve cells silhouetted in exquisite, stark black against a yellow background.
It sounds beautiful.
It was a monumental imaging breakthrough. I mean, without Golgi's stain, modern neuroscience just wouldn't exist. It is the direct ancestor of all those incredibly vibrant, colorful brain scans you see in science news today.
Right.
But Golgi looks at his own beautiful, unprecedented slides and interprets them as absolute proof for reticular theory.
Reticular theory being the idea that the entire nervous system is just one giant, continuous fused web. Like a plumbing system or a network of blood vessels with no physical separation between the cells.
Right. Golgi believed the signals just flowed freely through this endless connected net.
Okay, so enter Santiago Ramon y Cajal, a Spanish neuroanatomist with an incredible eye for detail.
A brilliant scientist.
Cajal takes Golgi's exact same silver staining method, prepares his own slides, looks through the microscope, and argues the exact opposite.
Yes. Cajal argues for the neuron doctrine. He realizes that these nerve cells are discrete, individual, autonomous units.
They aren't physically fused together at all.
Right. They are separated by incredibly tiny physical gaps.
Gaps that the British neurophysiologist Charles Sherrington would later brilliantly name synapses in 1897.
Exactly. And the term neuron itself was formally coined in 1891 by a scientist named Waldeyer, specifically to describe Cassell's discrete individual units.
Okay, but wait, I have to challenge the logic of this historical timeline.
Go for it.
Golgi invents the imaging tool. He takes the very first clear picture of the nervous system. How does he fail to see the gaps that are right in front of him? Were the gaps just too small for 19th century optical lenses, or was this monumental academic ego blinding him to his own data?
Honestly, it was a dangerous collision of both. Synaptic gaps are staggeringly small,
Like how small?
measured in nanometers. Under early microscopes, heavily stained tissue could easily look clumped and fused. Cassell had the brilliant insight to study the simpler, less cluttered brains of embryos to see the individual structures more clearly.
Oh, it's smart.
But Golgi was also deeply, stubbornly entrenched in his own theory. He saw what he wanted to see, and he refused to concede, even as the mounting evidence proved Cassell right.
Which culminates in what has to be the most awkward award ceremony ever recorded.
Without a doubt. 1906. The Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine is jointly awarded to Camillo Golgi and Santiago Ramon y Cajal.
Two men who use the identical chemical stain to reach fiercely opposing conclusions.
And who, by all historical accounts, deeply despised each other.
Golgi actually uses his Nobel lecture in Stockholm, the absolute pinnacle of scientific achievement, to publicly attack Cajal's theory.
He really did.
He stands on stage and bashes a theory that was built using his own invention.
It is a stunning moment in Nobel history. Laureates sharing the podium while directly contradicting each other's foundational science.
Just incredible drama.
Cajal was ultimately right. His neuron doctrine was undeniably confirmed decades later when electron microscopes finally provided enough resolution to physically photograph the synaptic gaps.
But the loser of the scientific debate still got equal billing on the Nobel stage.
Right, because his tool made the discovery possible.
It is incredible human drama. So the anatomists and the microscopists finally nail down the physical truth of the nervous system. But our story doesn't end there, because culture and psychiatry grab hold of this root, neuro, and drag it into some very strange, totally unscientific territory.
Yeah, the medical dictionary is an active graveyard. It is full of ghosts and cultural fads. Some words survive, and some become entirely obsolete.
Let's look at the ghost first. The living fossil hiding in plain sight. The word aponeurosis.
An aponeurosis is a broad, flat, incredibly tough sheet of connective tissue. You have a massive one stretching across the top of your scalp and another one in the palm of your hand.
And it has absolutely nothing to do with the nervous system, zero electrical signal.
Nothing at all. It is pure structural connective tissue. The word aponeurosis is a living fossil that perfectly preserves that ancient Homeric Greek meaning we discussed at the very beginning, tendon or sinew.
Oh, wow.
It sits right in the middle of modern medical dictionaries, completely oblivious to the fact that the definition of its own root changed centuries ago.
I find that fascinating. It's just frozen in time. But then we move from the fossils to the fads, the psychiatric misuse of the word. Because in 1769, a Scottish physician named William Cullen coined the term neurosis.
Right. Cullen initially used it as a very broad, vague category for any nervous system disorder where the doctor couldn't find an obvious physical lesion.
Like an invisible illness.
Yeah. If you had symptoms but your anatomy looked fine, you had neurosis.
Yeah.
But over the next century, the word drifted entirely away from physical anatomy.
Right.
It was absorbed by psychoanalytic theory, heavily shaped by Sigmund Freud, and transformed into a catch-all psychological label for anxiety, distress, and defense mechanisms.
And then it just bleeds into everyday cultural language. People say, oh, you're being so neurotic about this project. It feels exactly like how the word literally is used today.
How do you?
Well, a word stretched so far by pop culture that it entirely loses its original meaning and its clinical usefulness.
Oh, absolutely. It lost all clinical precision. The diagnosis became so muddy and unscientific that the American Psychiatric Association officially dropped neurosis as a valid diagnostic category in 1980 with the publication of the DSM-3.
They just threw it out.
They had to. They realized they needed to replace this vague cultural catch-all with empirically defined specific conditions like panic disorder, social phobia, and generalized anxiety.
So the physical root neuro survives in surgery, but the psychological diagnosis of neurosis had to be permanently retired.
And we saw a virtually identical arc with another 19th century diagnosis, Neurasthenia, which translated to nervous exhaustion.
Nervous exhaustion.
Coined in 1869, it became an incredibly fashionable diagnosis for the Victorian upper classes who felt overwhelmed by the pace of modern industrial life.
Wow.
Today, neurasthenia is largely abandoned in Western psychiatry, recognized more as a cultural phenomenon than a distinct neurological disease.
It really highlights how the idea of nervousness became this massive cultural metaphor. Feeling anxious or jittery before a big meeting doesn't mean your peripheral nerves are physically degrading.
Not at all.
Mm.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the popular conception of nervous disorders was heavily driven in the 18th century by physicians like George Cheyne in his hugely successful book, The English Malady.
Right.
Medical terminology consistently holds up a mirror to society's current anxieties.
Mm-hmm.
Diseases can become incredibly fashionable, they can define an entire generation's worries, and then they can vanish entirely when diagnostic science demands more precision.
Which brings us back to you, the listener. So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive exploring a messy, confused ancient history, but look at the reality of this word today. What began as a Greek term for a bowstring now dictates our most critical medical battles.
Right.
Stroke, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, they are all neuro-rooted diagnoses.
And this root dominates modern chronic pain management. Medications like gabapentin, which were originally developed to calm electrical storms in the brain for epilepsy, are now among the most widely prescribed drugs in the world for treating neuralgia and nerve pain.
Which is amazing.
Millions of lives depend daily on our evolving understanding of this system.
It is a phenomenal evolution. But before we wrap up, I know you have a final provocative thought on where this route is heading next, based on the pop culture section of our research.
I do, and it is something for you to seriously mull over. We have spent this entire deep dive discussing how neuro was defined by ancient anatomists tracing pathways with their hands and 19th century scientists peering through microscopes.
Always looking for the physical truth.
Exactly. It was always a quest to find the physical, objective truth of the human body. But look at where the root is being deployed today. Major corporations are pouring vast sums of money into neuromarketing.
Neuromarketing.
Yes, literally studying your brain waves
Yeah.
and biological responses to advertisements so they can subconsciously manipulate what you choose to buy.
That is deeply unsettling.
Right, and simultaneously, you have an endless supply of internet self-help gurus preaching neuroplasticity.
Okay, but neuroplasticity is real science, isn't it?
Now, neuroplasticity is the very real, verified science of the brain rewiring its own connections. But they package it and sell you a course promising that you can literally rewire your own brain for guaranteed financial success and extreme productivity.
Unbelievable. So the exact same word that once anchored a physical muscle to a bone is now being used to anchor marketing campaigns to your wallet.
The science of the nerve has been commodified. The prefix neuro is now regularly used as a marketing tool to make dubious claims sound rigorously scientific.
Well, the next time you see a flashy new product or a buzzword with neuro attached to the front of it, pause and ask yourself, are you looking at genuine science, or is someone just trying to pluck your bowstring? Thank you for joining us on today's deep dive. Keep questioning the words you use every day, and we'll see you next time.